Hello, I suppose we're ready to get started. I'd like to introduce Sergio.
Thank you. All right, thanks for coming. I'm going to talk about the debuginfod service, which I have been running for Debian for a little bit more than a year now. And yeah, let's start. So what is debuginfod? Debuginfod is a relatively young project. It was started around 2019 by some folks at Red Hat, and it's gaining traction every year. More and more distros are adopting it, and so last year, after just fiddling with it a little bit in my spare time, I decided it was time to set up for Debian. So it is a client server is a project that has a client side and a server side. The server side automatically distributes ELF and Dwarf and also source code from the server to clients. So who are the clients? Clients are basically debuggers. So GDB is, I think, the most well-known, but there are other tools that support it now, and it's being supported more and more. For example, SystemTap also supports it. I think the PA hole and the 7 Dwarfs utility from Acme also support it. So yeah, it's been implemented more and more. And what is the goal of debuginfod? So if you have ever debugged something in Debian or Ubuntu, for that matter, like this, they're pretty much similar. You know that you have to do a lot of steps in preparation for the debugging session to begin, and debuginfod is a way to shorten that process by quite a bit. So I'm gonna do a demo later so you can show how the service works. And as I said, it can do more than that. And what do I mean by that? I mean specifically about the source code, which is an awesome feature, and it hasn't been implemented in the Debian service yet, but I'm going to show the Fedora version of it, which is, Fedora is a state-of-the-art when it comes to debugging using debuginfod and GDB, and that's where I aim to go. So I'm going to show how a Fedora debugging session works, and then how a Debian debugging session works. Okay, but how does the service work? Basically, there's a debuginfod service, which in our case is hosted at debuginfod.debian.net. And this service indexes all of the available debug info from our distributions. So unstable, testing, experimental, stable, you name it. These debug infos are generated during build time, and these are the dbgsim packages that we right now we have to download and install in our systems, but debuginfod indexes everything on its server side, so you don't have to touch these files anymore. And then, as I said, debugger-like tools like GDB, they link against libdebuginfod, which is the client side. And when the tool needs a specific debug info, it will contact the server and request a debug info from the server. And the way it does that is by requesting a build ID specific. So the build ID is a hash that is generated for every object file that is compiled by GCC. And the debug info and the executable, they have the same build ID. So during the build step of the package, if you look at the logs, you're going to see a DH split command being executed, and that split command is what basically removes or extracts the debug info from the executable that was compiled and generates the dbgsim file. So these two guys, the executable and the debug info, have the same build ID. So that's why the tool GDB can ask for the build ID, because it knows from the executable that is debugging, and the server will just recover that debug info associated with the build ID and transmit it back to the client. So when it's found, in our case, it will transmit over HTTPS to the client. So how do you use it? So if you're using testing, unstable, or bullseye, GDB already has native support for it. So you basically have, what you have to do is you just have to export this environment variable in your shell with the URL of the service, and that's it. That's all you have to do. Unfortunately, I tried to include the automatic support for GDB so that you don't even have to export this variable because it will be automatically exported when you log in. But it was too late in the release cycle for Bullseye, and I wasn't able to get it in. Maybe for Bookworm. But yeah, like it's really easy. It's just this variable. And okay, let's do a demo. As I explained, I'm gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna actually switch the order. So I'm gonna do Debian first, and then Fedora to show you how like those are different. But basically, as I said, if I were to debug something in Debian right now, like without debuginfod, I would have to set up the Debian debug repository, install its GPG key in the key ring so that apt knows, and then I would install the equivalent debug info for the package that I'm debugging, which has to be the same version. So sometimes if you're debugging an older version of the software and the debug info is not available anymore in the Debian debug repository, you're out of luck, basically. You have to resort to snapshot.debian.org and have to find the correlated file there. But the debuginfod takes care of all of that for you behind the scenes, and you don't have to worry about versions anymore. As long as this version is indexed in the debuginfod service, it will find it. So I happen to maintain an awesome software in Debian called Poke. It's a software from the GNU project, and it's basically how do I explain? Like in simple layman terms, I would say it's a powerful, very powerful hex editor, but it does more than that. So anyway, I'm just gonna simulate a debugging session for Poke, like as if I were debugging Poke. So what do I do here? If I just type GDB Poke, you're gonna see no debugging symbols found, and basically I'm out of luck here because I don't have the Debian debug repository installed, and I don't want to do that. So if I, for example, if I put a breakpoint in main, GDB cannot even find the symbol for main. And so even if you say yes, okay, try to find it. If there's a main symbol in a shared library, let's see if it works. But it doesn't, and it even receives a seg fault here. So anyway, it doesn't work. Debugging doesn't work without debugging symbols here. Like it's very limited. You have to resort to maybe debugging assembly. But yeah, that's it. So if I want to, let me clean this up. If I want to use the debuginfod service that we have, I just export this variable, and then I can GDB poke. And then you notice that GDB detects that you have a debuginfod server configured to be used, and it asks you if you want to enable debuginfod for this session. This is kind of a privacy-aware question, and it was requested by us, Debian, and the community implemented it. So yeah, if you want to enable, you can just type yes, and you see that GDB has automatically downloaded the debug info for Poke, and now you actually have the symbols. Okay, basically GDB. Yeah, okay. I'm going to explain this download failed here in a moment, but GDB found the symbol main now, and you can actually debug, poke, and break at main, and break at many other functions you want. This message here, it happens because GDB could not find the source code for poke on the debuginfod server. So it expects to find both the debug symbols and maybe the source code. When it can't, it lets you know. Yeah, if you run poke, yeah, anyway, just another very nice thing about debuginfod, if you have ever debugged something that links against many libraries, for example, poke does that. You can notice that poke links against like a lot of libraries. If you are not using debuginfod, this means that you would have to download the dbgsim files for each one of those libraries separately. Of course, there is a tool in Debian, I think it's called find dbgsim or something, that you can use to kind of semi-automate that process. But debuginfod does that behind the scenes for you. And as I said, it does that for, like, it doesn't matter the version of the libraries you have. So you don't have to look for a specific debug symbol associated with that version of the binary or library that you're debugging. Debuginfod already knows the build ID. The build ID is like a one-to-one relationship. There's not going to be another build ID with like another library with the same build ID. So it downloads everything for you behind the scenes. However, you still don't have, like here I am, GDB hit the breakpoint at the main function, but if I try to see the source code, you're going to notice that it's not available. And why is it not available? As I said, because the service doesn't provide the source code. So how would you go about getting the source code on Debian? You have to resort to apt source for now. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Okay. I should have done that before. I forgot about this step. Anyway, while it downloads the source code there, or actually I have to install the dpkgdev package so that I can extract the source code and all. I mean, I could do that the other way, but anyway. I'm going to show you how Fedora looks like and how things are working in Fedora right now. So this is running Fedora 36, which is the latest revision. And I have poke installed here as well. I think same version as I have in Debian. I have GDB installed here. And I didn't have to do anything else. Debuginfod URLs is already set here. So this is what I wanted to do for Debian. Like because I don't have to worry about setting up the variable or anything. It just works. And if I want to download to debug poke or any other project for that matter, I just fire up GDB. It asks me the same question. If I say yes, it downloads both the debug info and the source code for poke. And so if I break at main, run, you're going to notice that it's going to download everything, just like it did for Debian. It's going to download the debug info, but what it does here that Debian doesn't is it downloads the source code as well. Because as I said, the source code is already available at Fedora's debuginfod server. So I didn't have to do anything. I literally set this Fedora container up like just a few minutes ago. I didn't touch anything. And if you see, the source code is already here. And it just works. Like next, if you want to step, not on this, but let's step here. Anyway, it just work. A regular debugging session. I didn't have to mess with the bug symbols, with extra repositories. even with the bash variable that I was talking about earlier. This is still running. So yeah, so you can see like there's still some things to do here, and I'm going to leave this running, and I'm going to keep, with the presentation, continue with it, and then I'll come back here later and see if it completed. So, okay, so why don't we provide source code for Debian packages in the debuginfod server? Because, well, there's a limitation with the way we do our builds. Because of the reproducible builds, we use a specific flag when compiling things on Debian, which is the file prefix map. And what it does is basically replaces part of the path of the full path that represents the compilation path of your binary with, well, it removes the prefix and it just keeps the relative path that is like it's not associated with the build process with what sbuild creates temporarily for building the package and all. And so, for example, poke, I just use poke as an example here. There is, if you take a look at poke's source code, you're going to see that like poke, the source code starts at poke, like the directory poke, and everything behind it is like sbuild specific that is generated during build time and all. And so our f file prefix map, it just removes that part, and it keeps a relative path in the directory table of the dwarf file. And so for that reason, I mean, this is a good solution for the reproducible builds problem, but it kind of breaks the tools that I'm using or that we're using to index the source codes and everything. And the other problem is that not every build we do uses that flag, because that flag depends on like the specific C flags being exported during the build of the package and all. So for example, if you take GDB itself, like the build logs for GDB itself, you won't find the file prefix map being used, which ends up generating a path that is full. It's a full path, but it looks like this. And this is basically, this is the sbuild stuff that I mentioned. Like this is a temporary path that sbuild generates during build, and it just goes into the dwarf. Of course, the debuginfod, when you tell him to index the source code, it will try to find the source code in this path. And this path doesn't exist in the actual origtar that we have. So I would have to mimic this path and do that for every other file that, or every other package that we ship. And for the relative paths problem that I was mentioning, I would actually have to replace, like to make it a full path. So what I've been trying to use is like, first of all, the debuginfod would work much better if we had a consistency in those paths. So for example, using Fedora as an example again, Fedora always uses /user/src/debug for the prefix path. And then everything that comes after that is the package path. So it is deterministic because it's always the same prefix. And when Fedora goes and tries to, like the debuginfod server at Fedora tries to index the source code, it always finds source code under /user/src/debug. So there is a tool that I have been playing with, and Fedora also uses this tool, which is called debug edit, and it can be used to edit this path here, and for example, replace this prefix by something deterministic, without messing up with the build ID of the dbgsim file, which is very important, of course. That's what we want. However, this tool also expects the initial path to be full. So for GDB, for example, it would work because the path is full. But for poke and for a lot of other stuff that uses the file prefix map flag, it won't work because it's a relative path. So I am trying to hack this tool, trying to see what I can come up with, and yeah, let's see if I can fix this problem. Initially, I'm focused on fixing the problem only for debuginfod on the server side. So even if I have to make something very hacky, but that works on the server, that's fine by me. I'm not looking to change the way we build things on Debian yet. And let's see, I mean, Debian is a very complicated project in terms of discussions and flame wars and everything. So have to be careful there. Okay, this is still stalling. I don't know what's happening. Anyway. Okay, future plans for the project is I would like it very much to host this with the DSA so that I can get a .org domain, and I think it would make it more trustworthy for our users. Like when they see Debian.net, it looks like well, what is this Debian.net thing? And even though Debian is paying for the host and for the machine, and I am a Debian developer and I'm taking care of the service and all, it would be very good to have DSA behind this as well. I have a ticket open with them, and we're working. It's an ongoing task, but I understand that DSA is very busy as well. And this ticket is a bit stale right now. I just have to ping it. And I would also love to index and serve debug info that is hosted at snapshot.debian.org. The problem is that the way they store files and the packages and everything is a bit different. So you have to make an API request. You can't just clone some repository just like I did for Debian debug. So using rsync, for example, is out of the question. As far as I know, by the way, if someone knows of a very good and hidden way of doing this, I would be happy to try to implement. And of course, as I said, index and serve source code. I am working on this in Ubuntu as well. The service should be available in a beta state in the next months without source code indexing either, because Ubuntu suffers from the same problem as Debian, because the build systems are pretty much the same. But working on this in Ubuntu has allowed me to even improve the Debian service as well, because I've noticed a few areas that could be improved, and this has already paid off a lot. So my intention is to kind of move these two, Ubuntu and Debian's debugging for these servers, together. If I implement something in one, I'm gonna replicate it in another because of the similarities between the two services. Let's see if I have anything more. I would like to thank our DPL, who has been very helpful, especially in giving me more disks, because this service requires a lot of storage to index and to clone and mirror the debug symbols. I just talked to him a few days ago, and he gave me the green light to get a few more disks for the service, so that's awesome. And of course, thanks Canonical for sponsoring my trip to DebConf. If you want more information, I wrote a somewhat extensive wiki page in our wiki, just /debuginfod. There is also the official project page here, where you can see the developments of everything like this. They have a nice table with the distros that have implemented this service, and you can see that it's growing and people are loving the service. You can also talk to me at OFTC, I'm always there, and Sergio DJ at debian.org. And that's what I have, but let's see how the installation is going. So yeah, you can see wouldn't it be nice if it were just like this? Yes, it would. But we're not there yet. We're kind of halfway. And I don't know if anyway, just if you guys have any questions, I can answer them while this goes. If it's not finished until, maybe it will be. So yeah, you guys have any questions? Thank you.
I noticed you used the environment variable is URLs.
Yes.
So how does it work? You can put multiple values there?
It will just try one after the other.
Right, and the other. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
and actually it's a good question because there's also something else about the service that is very interesting. The service is, it federates. So for example, suppose that you have some project, some internal project in your company, and it's a private one, proprietary or whatever, but you want to index its debug info files as well. So how would you do that without like having two URLs in the same debuginfod URLs variable? You would set up a debuginfod server internally to your company, and then you can configure it to federate to like Debian's debuginfod server. So when GDB, and then you configure your system to always query your debuginfod server. So when GDB consults your debuginfod server, if it doesn't find what GDB asks, it will try to find using Debian's. And so, like, for example, the guy who is behind this project at Red Hat, he runs a debuginfod server, I think at debuginfod.elfutils.org, that federates all of the others. So even like Fedora, CentOS, Arch, Debian, and so you could configure like GDB to use his debuginfod server because it would always consult and find Debian's files. So yeah, this is a nice feature. So okay, just let me run this very quick. So you would have to extract everything like apt source poke, and then you would open GDB, ask yes here, and then you have to point GDB to poke's source code so that GDB can actually find. But the source code here in this case is on your machine, is locally. It's not served by debuginfod. So you can do the same thing, like you can start. And oh yeah, you notice that when I started it now, it didn't download anything. That's because it keeps a cache locally. So if you start multiple times, you will always use the cache. And now you can actually use the source code, which is local. But you guys saw like how difficult it is to, like, not difficult, but like it requires more steps and more bandwidth to configure it now. So anyway, so here you can do everything you would in a GDB session. Anything else?
Yeah, you're talking about cache, and I see downloaded all the source files. And so I assume it can detect a new version and invalidates the cache and downloads the new version?
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't really invalidate, but it just downloads another, like another debuginfod, but it keeps the old version there. So the cache is here, like debuginfod client, and you can safely remove this whole directory, and it's okay. Like it will just download everything again. Sorry? Yeah. Yes. This is the build ID for the file. So, and I don't know if you. Sorry. Every presentation I do about GDB, I have to talk about this because otherwise people ask me later too. So if you wanna, if you've seen this, of course this is not working because I have to. Yeah, so this is a Control X and then A. It's called TUI, Text User Interface. It's built in to GDB. You don't have to install anything else, and it's it's really nice. It has colors now. It didn't for a long time, and then now it does. So yeah. Anyway, anything else?
I have a question around the integration into Elf utils. Do you happen to know why the debuginfod integration is fused into Elf utils rather than separated? And would that be possible to reduce dependency cycles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was put there because just Elf utils serves as an umbrella for everything related to Elf and Dwarf, and I know that the maintainer wanted to put it there first, but it's kind of independent in the sense that, as far as I know, it doesn't use anything specific to Elf utils libraries, and you can actually you can install just debuginfod. For example, the packages. Let's see here. Oh no, it does. libdw and libelf1. Yeah.
I know that it's kind of separate. I was wondering whether we could actually perform that separation within Debian.
Within Debian, okay.
As to have two actual source packages. Do you think that would be possible?
I think so. Yes.
Yeah, that would make automatic untangling of the bootstrap sequence just work.
Yes.
It does mean you get to upload twice, and it doesn't mean you get to keep the versions synced somehow.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off.
Yes. No, but I think it's possible. I have been talking to Doko about this on and off because I have some ideas for the source code indexing as well, and I wanted to hear his opinion on it. So yeah, this is an idea that I haven't considered, but yeah, it's a good idea, and yeah, I think it is possible. Anyone else? The camera. Cameraman.
So you showed that if you want to debug also the libraries, the shared libraries,
Yeah.
it's very easy because it's download the source code.
Yeah.
So in Debian, right now, if you want all those, you have to download yourself via the package source, right? The apt source.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
It's a pain.
Yeah, it is. I mean, usually you're interested in debugging the binary, but yes, if you want to do some deeper debugging session, then yes, you have to download the source. And by the way, something that I was asked last time I gave this presentation, which was last year at DebConf, you can also inhibit the downloading of the shared libraries using GDB. So if you just want to download the debuginfod for the binary but not its shared libraries, you can. Because otherwise, like if you're using a weak link, for example, just you don't have enough bandwidth, it can take some time to download everything for some projects. Like think of LibreOffice, for example, and yeah. All right. All right. No? Yes? No?
Question. Can I somehow integrate debuginfod into Linux perf? So when I go look at performance issues on the Linux kernel and user space, can I make it magically download debuginfod and tell me just where that stupid address is?
Yes, I think it is, or at least there was it's either an ongoing work or it's already integrated. But yeah, you can. It's yeah. Good question. Yeah. You can't debug the songs. You
Really?
replay.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. But I have another question about this. How can I generate the info, the debugging info data from my sounds? Not, it's a joking. It's a joke. How the data in the servers are created? Just by curiosity, because I have no idea about all of this. The information available on servers. Who put the data there? Who
the
creates?
debug info?
Yeah, the debug info.
Right.
In which step it's created?
During the package build?
No, in general. If you are debugging now and you download some information from the server, and someone else uploaded those information previously to the server, right? Or not?
Yeah. So it's during the build time, like the build time generates the debs and the dbgsim packages. So the dbgsim get uploaded to a special archive, which is called deb and debug. And so that's what you have to set up if you are not using debuginfod. And what I do is I mirror that entire archive into the debuginfod server, and then I index everything there. So the dbgsim files, they are generated during build time by the deb and build system.
Yes. Okay, by the deb and build system.
Yes.
Yeah. In the Fedora, the same thing. During the Fedora build system.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they have their package is called. I think the suffix is called debuginfo, and then they have another package called debug source, which is what makes this magic of indexing source code just work automatically on their side. On our side, we don't have that debug source. When I talked about it to Doko, he was very unhappy. And so for that reason, what I will have to do probably is I'll have to download the source package for every package version that I'm indexing. I have to explode it somewhere and let debuginfod index everything. So it's going to be a more costly process in terms of like a one by one. I have to do that. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would it be okay to return to perf one more time? I just checked in Debian testing. Linux perf doesn't link debuginfod. So I suppose there's something missing. Do you happen to know?
Offhand, I don't know. I have to
Maybe we
check.
can look into it later, but
Yes.
I guess it just doesn't work right now.
Okay. I'll check. Thank you. All right.
All right. Let's thank Sergio for his talk.
Thank you.